All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
And indeed, it's our Thursday offering. So great to have the Thursday recorded audience in here. So always am I lifted on Thursdays. Thursdays, we bring David Katz into our mix. He is the former federal prosecutor who's also now a defense attorney, but who also is one of the leading legal analysts in the English-speaking world. Comes here on Thursdays to help us with what is an increasing a hornet's nest of legal issues, particularly with an administration that, in my judgment, is completely lawless. So, and they're being kind of called out as such by even their judges, including the Supreme Court. I mean, they don't quite use that wording, but, you know, when you say something's against the law, you're saying, well, what you've done is lawless. We'll get to a lot of David Katz in hour two, but today we add a constitutional lawyer to the first hour.
What?
I know. The distinguished Corey Brettschneider will be here from Brown University.
It is Lawyer City on the Mark Thompson Show.
Get your constitutional questions ready. Boy, the Constitution is getting a workout these days. Kim is here.
Kim, how are you?
And Albert is here.
Albert, thank you.
In fact, I asked Albert right before the show went on, I asked him if he could put together a poll for me in the community section of our channel. And the poll relates to whether or not the government should be kept open. Now, you know, funding for the government and keeping the government open made it through the House. Now, with the Senate, it is possible that the Democrats could derail it. But what I'm suggesting is that, and the poll suggests, is that that might carry its own political weight. And beyond the political weight, if the government were to actually shut down, wouldn't receive the funding, two things happen at minimum, both of which favor Donald Trump and his chaotic discretion as to what should happen from that point forward. Number one, you keep essential workers on the job, right? That's kind of what happens in these instances in which the government shuts down. And Trump could decide who the essential workers are. So you could, just in moving those chess pieces, begin to see all kinds of issues emerging as a result of that. Number two, the Democrats, well, I'll give you a third thing while we're on Trump. While the government shut down, Trump could just run amok with Elon Musk. It would really open the door to every manner of shutting stuff down, of moving money around. It would be a chaos of the sort that we've seen, but I think with a multiplier. So I would be very concerned about that. And here's the political side of it. This is the third thing. The political side is that Schumer and the Democrats would be the ones to have blocked this resolution, and they would be the ones who would be blamed for shutting down the government. And the Republicans would say, hey, we gave the Democrats the budget, we passed it, and, you know, we settled on a continuing resolution, which is essentially the same funding that they just had. They blocked it. So if you got a problem with government services no longer being there, and if you have a problem with government shutting down, you've got a problem with Democrats. We, the Republicans, for all this stuff about how we want to, you know, we're taking an axe to government and everything, we're trying to keep the government open. It's the Democrats who are shutting things down. So you can see the political price that's paid. And I understand, this is maybe a little strange, because, you know, I'm always talking about Democrats have to do stuff, they have to lean in. And in a minute, we'll play you a bit of video that I think has gone viral and is the sort of thing I talk about when I say you have to do something and cut through the noise. I always talk about the fact that you need to make noise. So every little bit of noise that we make, this little show and other shows that are bigger and people who have, you know, real megaphones, that all is part of the noise, and some of it cuts through. And so some legislators, I always talk about Bernie Sanders, but there are a bunch of others, they have the power to go viral and to kind of issue the clarion call. So we'll play you a piece of video in a second that I think has gone viral. You probably have seen it, and a couple of you have sent it to me, and we'll talk about that. But what I would suggest is this is the wrong kind of leaning in, shutting down the government. I see that as not only having political blowback on the Democrats, but really opening the door to these guys who are thieves. I mean, the Trump administration is just, it's populated with thieves. Musk may be, the thief in chief, and or Trump. It's a photo finish. But my point is, you really, I think when you close the government down, you offer up something to them which they kind of want to take advantage of, and they don't really have an incentive to even go back and redo, meaning they could be good with the government being closed down for a while. So for those reasons, I'm not for the government shutting down. But Albert, what is the question in the community section of the chat?
I wanted to confirm that with you. I have it right now. This is live producing. Should the Democrats allow the government to shut down, or will it backfire?
Or will it backfire, and will they pay a political price?
So then the options you could answer would be shut down or backfire.
Oh,
I have a yes or no.
Yes or
Yes
no,
or no?
I think is it.
Okay.
Yeah, yes or no.
Ch-ch-ch.
All right. Kim, you are.
Kim, how are you?
You are reporting to us this morning
Yeah.
that there was a judge who has now issued an order to reinstate federal employees who were discharged. Is that correct?
Right. U.S. District Judge William Alsup. And he says the preliminary injunction issued from the bench says that there's a half a dozen federal agencies that fired their probationary employees. And he says, no, you have to put them back on the job. He said it was a sham that they were fired. And so the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Interior, Treasury must rehire those employees and reinstate them immediately.
Wow. I mean,
He said the court finds the Office of Personnel Management did direct all agencies to terminate probationary employees, with the exception of mission critical employees. He said that effective immediately, this is the order and it counts.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if the order is adhered to.
Well, labor unions were the ones that brought the suit, and it of course it would be appealed likely, and this is one of the beginning rulings on this. So we'll see how it goes.
We'll bring that up to Corey Brettschneider and also to David Katz a little bit later in this show. Great to have everybody here. There is, I know everybody on board here is a huge Donald Trump fan. You can't wait to see what he is going to unveil next. And one of the things that he keeps talking about is a third term. He wants to serve America even more.
What?
Yeah. Because there are still countries on earth that he hasn't smack talked and leaned on. And he doesn't think that 4 years is enough time to get to everybody. So a Trump third term, he's talking about it in relation to his meeting with the Irish president. The Irish prime minister is what he's technically referred to. And it was a weird kind of meeting with the Irish president anyway, because he, at the same time that he's meeting with the Irish president and everything seems to be sort of in this genial kind of place, he was slamming Ireland for having tax breaks such that they were getting so many American companies setting up shop there in Ireland. I mean, this has been the case for a long time. I mean, I think Apple is set up in, again, from a tax basis, that's the most advantageous place to be. So during the St. Patrick's Day event, President Trump said that he looked forward to celebrating with the Irish Prime Minister at least 3 more times. And then he sort of referenced that he would love to be in office longer. And he says, when I say that, they, pointing to the media, go absolutely crazy. He says, but thank you very much for being here. Now, he's spoken about running for a third term on a number of occasions. He talked to a crowd at the White House and asked, should I run again?
He keeps bringing it up.
Yeah, he does keep bringing it up. I mean, this felt like a joke, you know, but
it's always a joke, Mark.
Right.
How many times is he going to make the same joke? Eventually, people are going to realize, oh, he means it.
Yeah. I mean, his son, Don Jr., is seriously talking about running for president. So,
God.
You have a Kim Jong-un kind of situation where it goes Kim to Kim. So, anyway, that's the latest on
not the good Kim.
Not the good Kim, which is who's our Kim. Yeah. The latest polling, as you know, is negative on Donald Trump. I think more is being made of that right now than need be made, but it's not nothing. I mean, he's definitely down in approval when it comes to the economy, which is something that he was really granted all this running room with, at least in terms of the public's sense of what he could do. I mean, he ran on the economy, right? He was viewed as potentially, I think, by a lot of people who voted for him, better for the economy than Joe Biden. And so now it's not nothing, as I say, that the latest polling is down on him. They conducted a CNN poll, which puts him underwater on that, which is the economy. Markets sliding, investors worrying in response to Trump's trade policies, as I'm reading this piece now. A 56% majority of the public disapproves of his handling of the economy. That's worse than at any point during his first term in office. By contrast, the 51% who now say they approve of his work on immigration, headlined, of course, by stricter enforcement efforts, that's 7 points higher than at any point during his first term. But when it comes to the economy and the budget and managing the federal government, it's about half and half. So that's why I say you can't pay too much attention to this, although I think on the economy particularly, you can, because he was elected in large measure on the strength of sort of this reputation, which I felt was completely imagined, but, others believed it. I mean, insufficient numbers to win, that he would be better for the economy than Joe Biden. So some good news. I've got it.
The Mark Thompson Show.
There were 6 Americans that were being held in Kuwait. They have been released, just landed back in the U.S. Many of them are veterans, former military contractors as well. They were convicted on drug charges. And they are back. They all vigorously maintained innocence, but they were taken and prosecuted nonetheless. They are back in America. And speaking of America, America is a place where many voices are heard. Finally, some voices may be cutting through. And so I will share with you, I do want to share with you something I'm seeing. First of all, Candace, thank you very much. Candace Worthman with a $10 super sticker, and that is super cool.
Big shout out.
We're a crowd-funded show, so we make a big deal out of the part of the crowd that funds us. We have basically an NPR PBS model, so you're able to see the show for free. You're able to hear the show for free, but the show is underwritten by a lot of people. Many of them are in the chat, and our core audience is really the reason we're here. And so thank you to all of you. And by the way, if you are new and you have become a Patreon or PayPal member, or you want to become a Patreon or PayPal supporter and join that community, it's simple. You just click through either the hot links under our YouTube videos, or you go to the markthompsonshow.com, and there are hot links there. Don't go through the Patreon app. If you go through the Patreon app, which is on Apple or in the Google Play Store, they take 30% of the money. So it's great that you have the generosity, but if you go through the app, the man is scooping 30% off the top, baby. You know what I'm saying, all right? So go through the links underneath our videos, or go through the link from our website, themarkthompsonshow.com. What I was going to mention is Albert has that poll up in the community section of our channel. Isn't that right, Albert?
That's correct. And if you're actually subscribed to the show, it'll appear in your subscription section in the content where you can see our breakout videos.
Yeah. Excellent. Well done, Albert.
Albert, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Now, I wanted to quickly share this video, which was shared with me by many. I think it's one of those videos that has cut through a little bit, and because of its virality, it maintains a significance maybe for another day or so as it's shared. This is Representative John Larson, and he's talking about Social Security and the fact that Elon Musk and his henchmen are MIA and don't show up to these committee hearings that are reviewing Social Security. So here you are, putting Social Security on the chopping block. You talk about it openly. You have infiltrated government in every way possible, and yet you're not there to testify before the committee. And Larson's comments, I think, as I say, not only cut through in the moment, but they've achieved a certain altitude and a certain media oxygen that's significant. We'll play you them right now.
Men and women on this committee are good people. They're honest and caring people. And that's why I do not understand why you would relegate this committee to no longer being of significance and resort to saying you will do whatever Elon Musk and Donald Trump tell you to do. Where's the independence of the committee? Where's the legislature? We're an equal branch of government. And you start off with a blather, and yet look at the empty seats here. Where's Elon Musk? I'm sure he's a genius and is a very credible person because of the wealth he's accumulated. But that does not put him above the law or the responsibility to come before this committee in this Congress. If he's so great, if these plans and all the fraud and abuse that he found are so evident, why isn't he here explaining it? You know why. Because he's out to privatize Social Security. He's been on television the last couple of days talking exactly about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and what he intends to do. Privatize it. The American people, some of them may have been born at night, but not last night. People are aware of this. Every single one of your districts. Now you have someone coming in to privatize a system, something you have longed to do going back to 1982, because Elon Musk thinks that this is the best thing to do. President Trump has called Social Security a scam. Elon Musk, as chairman, as Mr. Neal said, called it a Ponzi scheme. Ask that of the people in your district. Ask that, Mr. Smith, of the more than 198,000 people in your district who rely on Social Security, and you won't even let the person who's planning to privatize it, who's telling the big lie in front of everyone, in bold as he possibly can, saying, this is what we're going to do. The Congress is in our back pocket. We don't even have to come before them and testify because we control the House, we control the Senate, and we control the presidency. And it's the tyranny of the executive. It's why these resolutions were first adopted back in 1789, because the founding fathers knew that the executive branch does not have total authority over the legislature unless you have a willing party that says, no, we're going to do exactly what you tell us to do, Mr. Musk and Mr. President. It doesn't matter to our constituents. It doesn't matter how much money they are not going to receive. We're not even going to tell them the truth about what's going to happen to them. They administer to over 70 million people in the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and children. Shame! Shame! can't bring people in front of this body? If he's right, if they're so good, if they're so just, why aren't they here telling the American people about it? They're not, because you know the truth. It's about privatization. I yield back.
I mean, that's a powerful run, and it has gone viral. It's picked up by MS, as you could see, and it's being shared. It was shared to me by, I think, 5 different people sent me emails about it. So this stuff does matter. And of course, what he's saying is absolute truth, and we've talked about it before. I mean, here's this guy, completely unelected, and he was just sort of deputized by Donald Trump, and then allowed, I think more to the point, by a Congress that is, sitting on its hands because they're scared, by a GOP that is completely, I think, more frightened of Donald Trump than in love with Donald Trump. He is permitted to run amok. So
I think the reason it's gone viral is because you hear the anger in his voice, and it's what so many people are feeling, and they've just been wanting someone to say, can someone stand up for me and express my anger about all of this? And here you have him doing that.
Sure. Absolutely right. I've got Corey in another 3 minutes or so. I really wanted to get to, by the way, there's a great drop in there. I mean, I hate to be,
I know.
always, yeah, but I mean, the shame. I mean, that's a
shame.
Yeah.
Shame.
Yeah. I mean, that's just strong.
I think so.
I feel like that could make it into Mark's Madness, Albert. The shame, shame, don't you think?
Shame.
I mean, I
That'll
feel
be
like
a very
that.
recent addition. Yeah.
Yeah, a very recent addition. The double shame, very strong.
Shame.
Yeah, I know.
Shame.
I know. So we've had just the update between yesterday and today. We've had 2 additions then to Mark's Madness. You've got the Tesla.
I love Tesla.
I love Tesla. Right. Thank you. And you got shame. So it could be pretty hot.
Yeah.
Now, again, if you're new to us, Mark's Madness is something that we've brought over. We've been doing it for years. We have drops that show up on the show. They're like things, well, like you heard, shame would be a drop. Like it just comes out of nowhere. It's dropped in. It's an audio drop. And for that reason, they call them drops. But anyway, we play them all off against each other. So we have a field of drops the same way that March Madness is set up. And you'll get a bracket, and you'll fill it out. And we'll tell you all the ways to fill it out. It's very easy. We have a separate video set up, and the commissioner of March Madness is Albert, and he is doing that. And we're doing the heavy lifting, which is deciding which drops make it into the tournament. That's being done right after the show. So we'll have an update tomorrow, and then over the weekend, you'll have access to the brackets. You'll be able to play, and then we get it underway next week. So that's the latest on March Madness. Latest on shame, and shame, of course, the latest entry into March Madness, which is why I stopped to mention.
Shame.
Yes, exactly.
Shame.
All right, very good.
The Mark Thompson Show.
More to the point, I mean, that was obviously that needed to be said, and I'm glad it's getting out there. So, wow, I don't know that the Constitution has had the kind of legal pressure on it that it has had in the last 6 weeks ever. In the history of the Republic. But there's one guy who can tell us. He is the co-host of the Oath and Office podcast, and he's the author of The Presidents and the People, 5 Leaders Who Threatened Democracy and the Citizens Who Fought to Defend It. He is a brilliant mind out of Brown University and a friend of the show. Corey Brettschneider, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. What a pleasure to be with you, and looking forward to the conversation, and thanks for that intro. I have a new part of my biography, as you said, which is that John Fugelsang and I, for the last 4 weeks, have felt the urgency that you were just talking about in your introduction about the threat to the Constitution that we're seeing. And so we've started a podcast called The Oath and the Office. When you and I first met, I had written a book called The Oath and the Office.
Thank you. I was just about to note that. Yeah, exactly. Who knew that it would turn into a podcast?
Yeah.
And Fugelsang is brilliant. So that's a great pairing, the two of you together. It's I can't wait to check it out. Wasn't aware of it, so glad we could get the word out. So
we're already sorry. I mean, the I'll attribute all the success to John, but we're already at the top of the government category because I think people really want to know what's going on. But when you often hear the news, even through outlets like NPR, it's a little dry. And so John brings a lot of levity and comedy.
Yes.
And of course, I'm the straight man, and giving as much serious analysis as I can. And so we've been doing this show on Sirius XM. Actually, Mark, I think the way I know you is that I used to do John's show with David Feldman, and I know he introduced us years ago. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's and Fugelsang is great. There he is, looking his most handsome, and there you are,
very professorial.
Your most exactly most credible. So it's terrific, and we'll mention it again at the end of this conversation. I really like that we're that you're out there with it, and congratulations on the success. So, well, maybe I'll start with what you've been talking about on the podcast then. I hadn't intended to, but what is the thing that has floated to the top? Because there's a lot of competition for what should get the kind of media oxygen that raises public consciousness.
I think what's unique about what we're doing is that while there are a lot of shows, a lot of podcasts talking about the news that are terrific, what we're trying to do is really look to connect the dots and to see each of these particular stories. I'm sure we'll talk about the Khalil story, for instance, the salesman job of selling Teslas, to connect it to the assault on the Constitution. And the idea really is, as you and I have often talked about, that there are constitutional protections in a democracy that are supposed to be honored. And ideally, they're going to be honored by the court. But part of what we're about is the idea that it might not be. So we're as critical of the president as we often are of the court. And it's an attempt to really make good on that promise of citizens defending the Constitution. There is no Constitution police. It's not self-executing. So that's really what we're trying to do, is to galvanize support behind it and to, cover the particular stories, but also to weave them together. And this is, I think, not an unprecedented assault on democracy. That my book, The Presidents and the People, I should thank you too, because after, there are a few, I did a podcast with Preet Bharara, MSNBC. Some shows can really boost sales of The Presidents and the People and help me get my message out. And yours was incredible. You have such a close listenership, and I'm so grateful to so many in your audience who bought the book and have been, writing reviews. And so
I'm so glad to hear that. We have a lot of smart people, and they're activated. They're anxious to know what can be done. They want to learn more, and then they act on what they've learned. So, well, you mentioned Khalil, so maybe I'll start that conversation, and we'll get to some of this other stuff like federal layoffs and now rehirings, et cetera. So the Khalil thing was interesting, and you also kind of mentioned the Tesla thing, because the Tesla protests that were kind of adjacent to the Tesla pitchman crap that was going on at the White House. That's a weaponization, I would suggest, of the Justice Department, characterizing, for those who don't know, protests against Tesla. Now, you can maybe help me with whether they mention violence or whether they just mention protest. I can't recall what it is, but as an act of terrorism. And by doing that, it's a whole separate category of prosecution and of sentencing. I know this from the animal rights movement. Many of my friends in animal rights have been prosecuted as terrorists. It's a horrifying thing. I mean, just for protesting and blocking the entrance, for example, to a slaughterhouse or whatever it might be. Actually, it wasn't even that. In the case of the ones I'm thinking of, it was a bank that was funding a lot of laboratory testing of animals, and that's why they were protesting. But anyway, to this point, so on the one hand, you have the Tesla protesters being classified as terrorists, and on the other hand, you have this Khalil, who is who is now being both, I would suggest, pursued by this administration, I mean, relentlessly, and now maybe at the 11th hour here has a little bit of running room. You can now maybe put some coherence to what I just said. But.
Yeah, no, that's a great intro. I mean, and I think there is a common element, which is that Trump and the Justice Department now, I should say, part of what he's done that makes this very different than Trump 1.0, is in Trump 1.0, there was a lot of pushback. Members of the civil service, including within the Justice Department, would say you can't do that. And he's really establishing a kind of iron fist order by firing everyone who's not loyal to his vision. So what he says seems to go. And he has no appreciation, I would say, for this understatement of the year, for the right to dissent, the right to free speech. In fact, it's sort of the definition of what an autocrat is, that they seek to shut down speech that they don't like. And so when he uses this phrase, illegal protests, really what he's doing is mixing things that are, of course, not protected, like incitement to violence, with things that certainly are not only protected, but enshrined in the First Amendment, right to free speech and the right to assembly. And, you see that in his tweet in particular, and we talked about this actually in the last episode of The Oath and the Office in Depth. John, in his Trump voice, read out the details of the Trump so-called truth, explaining why Khalil has been seized by the government, arrested, detained. And when you look through this mishmash, it's always a Trump mishmash, but it's very clear that the reason why Trump thinks and has ordered his arrest is to do with his beliefs. That, as much as he uses that word illegal protest, what Trump thinks is illegal is simply having sympathy, and that's the word that he uses, with groups that he doesn't agree with. Now, just to up the ante, his accusation, and I haven't seen any proof of this, is that Khalil is a sympathizer of Hamas. Now, again, I haven't seen any evidence of it, but even if he was, that would be protected speech. And that's one of the ideas that I'm trying to get out to the American people. So one of my lines that I've been repeating, and Mark, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess this is one of your favorite lines too, but is from the Blues Brothers when they're lined up in Illinois. And, I'm not an actor, but in my best actor voice, Bellucci says, Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis, and then, of course, drive through. That's a reference to the Skokie case, which had recently been decided. And what the Supreme Court said there was that even the Nazis, with their swastika, the most evil set of beliefs that you could imagine, can't be punished in this country. Can they be criticized? Sure. Condemned? Yes, they should be. But you can't punish even that speech. So even if Khalil is a sympathizer with Hamas, which, again, no evidence that he is, he would certainly be protected. And that's not a controversial part of the First Amendment. So this, you also, I think, have to, it's not a case, of course, about anti-Semitism, although Trump is claiming that. It's really, if you tie these things together, part of the assault on the right to dissent. And what I've been saying is if he's not coming for you right now, he will be in the future, because if you disobey him, his view is you're engaged in a kind of illegal protest.
Yeah, I think we all feel on some level as though we may be eventually shut down or worse.
Right.
The thing about the Tesla protests being, I'll just say, outlawed, and the Khalil relentless pursuit is that it's coming from him, the executive office. And that's why I'm glad I'm talking to you, because you can tell me, can the president just declare? I mean, it would seem maybe because of recent Supreme Court decisions that the president has a lot of latitude. Can he just declare this to be these people to be enemies of the state type thing?
No, absolutely not. And that's one of the, Trump himself wants to be an autocrat. And I should say this up front. So when it comes to what he can do in his mind, he's an authoritarian. And I've been using the word autocoup to describe what he's trying to do, which is to take the power of the office and turn it into an illegitimate power, far from co-equal branches, as you heard in that brilliant speech that I was so glad to hear from the Connecticut congressman. Instead of co-equal branches, he's really doing what a lot of Latin American countries' leaders have done, presidents, in collapsing the system, which is seizing control from the courts, from Congress, and even now from the Constitution, and declaring that he can do whatever he wants. But in terms of what he's allowed to do under the Constitution, absolutely not. The Constitution and its guarantee in the First Amendment that government shall not abridge the freedom of speech certainly applies to the president. And that's a long, hard-fought principle, but it's a bedrock one. I think the Supreme Court would, even now, although Trump is trying this auto coup, be too embarrassed to allow that to go forward when they get the Khalil case. But just to be clear, too, his argument is, well, there's a law passed mid-20th century, that gives us the power to detain non-citizens who are being critical of the foreign policy of the United States. And that is true. There's a broad language in legislation from that period. But it doesn't matter, because in our system, the Constitution is higher than any statute. And in fact, there's a Supreme Court case from the 1940s saying exactly that the First Amendment, and multiple cases, I should say, the First Amendment and the Constitution doesn't just apply to citizens. Free speech is a protection of all. And just to add on, by the way, this isn't an undocumented person. He is in the country, not only legally, but as a green card holder.
Right, exactly. So he's been vetted as a green card holder. I mean, they don't just give out green cards without significant background checks, et cetera.
Right.
So he's gone through all of that. And so to have him now labeled in this way, it just runs counter to all of that, which I've just talked about, meaning, background checks, et cetera. So this will be appealed and it'll be talked about more. Meanwhile, the political arsonist that Trump is and that Musk is, it seems to be there's a kind of wanton destruction over government that has seen the discharge of hundreds of thousands of federal workers. I mean, 80,000 from I think Social Security, and tens of thousands from the Park Service, et cetera. But even if, just with loose numbers, it's a lot of people. What is the legal status? Because today a judge has just said, hey, you can't dismiss all of these people. They must be rehired, and they must be rehired right away. Now that will be appealed. Take me through all of that, Corey Brettschneider. And then what is, in your judgment, the legal status of these decisions that Musk is making as to getting rid of a federal workforce?
There are about 45 cases that are pending in the courts at different stages. And what's happening is that in many of these cases, as you've mentioned, federal judges are putting a stop to what Musk is trying to do. But let me just try to back up a little bit and talk about what they all have together, and then I'll mention some of the details of these individual cases. What they share in common is that this attempted auto coup to seize power from Congress in particular and from the courts. Trump, I think, has executive functioning problems, so he needs somebody to carry it out. And in Musk, he's found somebody who's willing to actually go and try to figure out how you usurp the powers of Congress. And so the power of the purse, let's take it, lies famously with Congress. So part of what DOJ is doing that's illegal is stopping payments that have been allocated by Congress. But Musk doesn't care. He went into the Treasury Department, figured out where these payments were happening, same way he did with Twitter, basically, broke into the computer, just started stopping the payment. So in other words, there's the legal power of the purse, and then there's the actual purse. And Musk went and found it and stole it, essentially, stole the purse. So that's some of what's happening. The destruction of USAID and the Department of USAID, let's take that. That has been authorized by Congress. So Musk can't just abolish it the way that he wants to. That's the second case, which fits this pattern. And the third thing is there's a challenge to Musk himself and to DOJ's existence, because it looks like this isn't just an executive agency, but it's an executive agency and Musk himself, that rise above all the other cabinet officials. But what established it? And who confirmed Musk? If you're a principal officer of the United States, you're supposed to be confirmed by the Senate. And Musk, of course, hasn't been confirmed. So that's another case. So we could go through each of these, but they all have a familiar pattern, which is the usurpation of the powers of Congress and the separation of powers and stealing them, literally, by the presidency. That's why I've been using this term, auto coup. By the way, that might sound extreme to people because it sounds like violence, but so many of the destructions of the presidential systems modeled on our own throughout Latin America, in places like Peru or in Venezuela, didn't happen through violence. They happened through presidents just doing what Musk is doing with Trump, seizing control of these other.
Yeah, I've called it a soft coup, and I think that it's. But it's also a creep. There's sort of like a, more and more is being taken over by this crowd. The thing that surprises me a bit, just as we're talking, it just surprises me that they've been so very reckless and so aggressive. So it's aggressiveness meets recklessness, and you end up, I get this, move fast and break stuff. I mean, I guess that's the cool thing that those tech bros say, but it's just bullshit. And when you deal with government, this isn't a startup. And it's not a business, okay? So this crap and all your little cool phrases and your little, hoodies that you guys wear as you set up your laptops and hack into federal systems, that's not really the way things are done here. And the thing that surprises me, as I say, is that they have moved so recklessly. So the undoing of what they've done is actually painstaking. And I'm not so sure it, in the end, will be, that you can put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
That's right. And, that's the theme of the book that we talked about last time, The Presidents and the People, 5 Leaders Who Threatened Democracy and the Citizens Who Fought to Defend It. The theme is that we have seen this kind of destruction before. And exactly as you say, it sometimes takes decades to put things back, and certainly multiple administrations, because destruction is a lot easier than building. And, I'll take a couple of examples. Let's take the first example. John Adams, to go back to our first conversation, not only threatens to shut down free speech the way that Trump is, he succeeds in it. He prosecutes about 126 political opponents, newspaper editors, and member of Congress, Matthew Lyons from Vermont, is imprisoned and wins re-election from prison. So he succeeds, John Adams, who's lauded, by the way, in miniseries and the way we do presidential history. We've just ignored threats to democracy like this one. So how did we fight back? The courts didn't save us there, and so I think there's a lesson in that. You would have thought, okay, there's a right to free speech that should be protected by the Supreme Court. But in fact, what happens is that one of the justices, Samuel Chase, actually goes and sits on the trial of one of the editors who's prosecuted, Thomas Cooper. And what he does is he ensures that Cooper can't even raise the issue of free speech in the first place, seeing to it that he's convicted. He lobbies for the passing of the law. So what does work? That's what Americans want to know right now. Where does the hope come from? What works is citizens actually fighting back against Adams, fighting back by using their own trials, in this case the editors, as a way of putting John Adams on trial. And by putting John Adams on trial for the American people, the way they do it is not in a courtroom, but through the election of 1800. Thomas Jefferson doesn't give a lot of speeches. The editors step into the void that is left by Jefferson's absence in campaigning, which I should say is pretty common at the time. And they use that election to elect Jefferson on the basis of there won't be a return of the Sedition Act. So Jefferson says, we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans. In other words, I'm going to restore this right of dissent. Now, to the question that we're on, it takes time to reestablish the norms. And in fact, Jefferson himself is not fully committed to it, and so seeks the prosecution of his political opponents at the same time that he pretends to care about free speech. But finally, during Madison, this norm that we see every week on Saturday Night Live, the right to dissent, is reestablished. So these cycles, and in the resistance to slavery that you get from Frederick Douglass, in the resistance to the nationalization, the first white supremacist president in Wilson, the resistance from people like Ida B. Wells and William Monroe Trotter, these take decades to really put things back. So as optimistic as I am that we can defeat this to really restore and come back better, I should say, which should be the goal, not just restoration, but improvement. It's going to take time. And that's hard to tell people, who want to see immediate victory. But the damage is significant and going to be worse, I think, before it gets better.
Agreed. I mean, I don't even think you need to be a legal scholar to realize that, the damage will be substantial. And I don't know how you stop the bleeding, particularly given one of the first things you said, and was noted all along the way, even in the ramp up before the guy was even inaugurated, was like, I don't get what this Doge thing is. It doesn't seem like it's going to be legitimized in any way. I can see that maybe you could have Musk there. He's kind of a hood ornament, and he could recommend things that Congress will then decide upon, or more typically in the case of Congress, not decide upon. But it was just the opposite. He was anything but a hood ornament. Congress was the hood ornament, right. And Musk and Doge is all of a sudden this thing that we're talking about, even notwithstanding what you've just said or what you noted along the way, which is, this was just created out of thin air. It has no congressional approval.
Absolutely. And, there's, as Trump often does, there's two sides to what he's saying. One thing that he's saying is Musk is just recommending things. What are you talking about? That he's a principal officer and needs to be confirmed by the Senate. He's just giving recommendations. And that's what they're actually saying in court. That's what his lawyers are saying. It's the way that they're defending the idea that this appointment is in any way legal. And yet you heard him in the State of the Union say exactly the opposite, that Musk, he had him stand up and be recognized, that he's leading the charge and, for basically eliminating many functions of government. And you saw that in the cabinet meeting where he essentially told cabinet members, you better listen to this guy. And so it is a kind of coup. That's why that language makes sense. Seizing control from the other branches. I should say, too, to go back to our original theme, that, some of these executive orders are kind of just obviously unconstitutional. The birthright citizenship is the one that stands out. But I also think the seizing of Khalil in these statements, although that some of these actions are blatant assaults on the Constitution. And I think some of them, there'll be pushback. But here's the worrying thing. Things like DOGE, many of these allocation functions, the Supreme Court itself is complicit in all of this because it has a theory that really dating back to the Mies Justice Department during Reagan called the unitary executive. And it really is almost an invitation to the auto coup. It doesn't demand the auto coup, but it gives the president a lot of power over civil servants. And really, let's get down to brass tacks. A lot of this control is about whether or not the president can engage in political firing of civil servants. And since the 19th century, we've had the Pendleton Act and other legislation that protects against political firing. And the Supreme Court is just lining up, waiting to say, yeah, political firing by a president is fine. And they've had that agenda in mind for, conservatives, I should say, starting with this Mies Justice Department and justices like Scalia. So we're in trouble. I want to be hopeful. That's what my podcast is about. The president does take an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. We've got to hold him to that. But at the same time, let's be honest here. This is really serious stuff.
Yeah, it does appear that a lot of the values that are wrapped up in the Constitution and that oath are just not being honored and openly not being honored. I'm seeing in the chat, this isn't somebody saying it's not a soft coup. It's right here in plain sight. No, I get that it's in plain sight. When I say soft coup, I mean that it's not a violent coup. It's not a violent takeover. Even as he's, though, taken over the military, which I think is a sign of a growing coup when you replace all the military leaders with loyalists, when you replace your entire administration with loyalists, a litmus test associated with the FBI and Justice Department service, that must make you sick. These people have to agree to the fact that the 2020 election was stolen. This is the litmus test they are giving federal employees. So right away, you are just populating that federal government under Trump with those who are all loyal to him.
And I've got to say, I'm glad that you focused in on the Department of Justice because we've been talking generally about political firings, but where it matters most, I think, is in the Department of Justice. Last time, and previous to this moment, there are all sorts of protections for civil servants in the Justice Department. So when he tried to convince them to go along with his January 6th plot to steal the election, many of them, most of them actually, just resisted and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they knew that they were protected from political firing. Now what he's doing is just cleaning house. And I'm not seeing a lot of pushback in defense of the Pendleton Act. And although there'll be some suits, for instance, there's one about the National Labor Relations Board, about his power to engage in political firing. In that case, it's a slightly different topic about independent agencies. The court's going to back him up. And let's just not forget the granddaddy of them all, the unitary executive on steroids, as I call it, which is the immunity case. For the first time in American history, the Supreme Court said they'd never said a sitting president has immunity. They not only said that, but that a former president has immunity from his official, at least acting in his official duties. The official duties are the most dangerous. That's what Trump is saying in all these cases. So the court has really enabled this. I like that self-coup to get across the idea of nonviolence, and the auto coup to get across the idea it's coming from the president swallowing up the other branches. And the court has just given him the keys to that auto coup.
Indeed. The focusing on the court and then immunity, I think, it's so right on. I mean, it's clearly. This Narek by the Sea says, what about the longest day House Republicans just enacted, which allows them to not vote on stopping the tariffs? Yeah, this is interesting. So just to I mean, you can explain it probably better than I can, but essentially the House Congress could block the tariffs. They could, well, the way they would do it is this emergency that he's declared, they would Bigfoot that, and they'd say it's not an emergency, so we're going to rule on the tariffs. Because the only way a president has the power to rule on the tariffs, as I understand it, Corey, is to declare this national emergency, which he's done, and now he is playing fast and loose with tariffs. And Congress has passed on this option by some wording that makes it not an entire day until the end of the term, I think, or the end of the year. I haven't read the wording, but maybe you can remind me what it is.
Well, there are a couple of issues here. One is that exactly right, that Congress could say, we're the lawmaking body here, and so we make the law, not you. And who are you to just unilaterally, remake America? And far from doing that, they're enabling him in this. So that's part of the problem. On emergencies, that's a huge and really important topic, and goes, I think, to our theme about recovery. The theme of the presidents and the people is that we never really recovered from Nixon, that the pardon in particular wiped away so many of the crimes and hid them from us. Nixon claimed, by the way, immunity. He said, when a president does it, it's not illegal. That's another way we haven't recovered. The Supreme Court has essentially said that he was right. But there was a moment, and you'll see this is a long lead up to come back to emergency. There was an attempt to roll back presidential power with a crucial piece of legislation that actually Justice Scalia, when he was working in the Ford Office of Legal Counsel in the Ford Justice Department, really objected to. He thought it was going to be such a limit on presidential power. He hated it. It's called the Emergencies Act. And it said a very simple thing, which is that a bare majority of both houses could stop an emergency. If Trump's claiming emergency powers to set these tariffs, both houses could have in the past used this Emergency Act to stop it. Now, to make a long story short, Scalia hated this, and then rose, of course, to become the most influential justice and in a series of cases said that what he called legislative vetoes, like this one, majority of both houses just stopping a president, were unconstitutional. That you needed 2/3 to stop a majority, generally, of both houses to stop really presidential action. Anyway, long story.
No, wait. That's really important.
Yeah,
so let me just ask you a follow-up quickly, and then we can get back to the original thread.
Yeah.
So would Congress still need a 2/3 majority in order to stop this emergency? Okay.
That's because of Scalia.
Okay.
The Congress amended the Emergencies Act, and now this is where people like Fugel saying, and you have to stop me because I'm getting very wonky. The idea originally was both houses, just a majority could stop a president. It was a very effective way of curbing presidential power. When you amend it to require 2/3 of both houses, that sounds like, okay, it's impossible. You can't get 2/3 of both houses to do anything. It essentially took this thing that was supposed to stop presidential power and instead did the opposite. It aggrandized it. So that's part of the story.
So for all this attention about how Congress has passed on this, and they did this awful thing, but they didn't have to even vote. I guess that was the true cowardice here. They didn't have to even see, well, we don't have 2/3. They just found a way to reword what a day is because, again, it was all about the number of days, et cetera. And so Trump can be the tariff king, and they have no say as to what will happen. It's extraordinary. Yeah.
And I should say too, again, just to widen out, it's not just tariffs. It's that they instead of waiting for courts to stop Doge, they could be demanding confirmation hearings for Musk. Instead of allowing them to destroy USAID, they could pass legislation reaffirming its need. They could be doing, in all of these cases, in 45, I think I mentioned at this stage, they could be shoring up their own power, and instead what they're doing is giving it over. And the Hitler analogy, I realize that people are very leery of it, but it is the most devastating auto coup in world history. And when you look at it, it was done in two ways. Some of it was through executive order. The Reichstag fire decree is one example, setting kind of emergency power. But there also was an enabling act, handing over power to the executive. And that's what's going on here, a series of enabling, actions by Congress. They're refusing to stop it anyway.
Exactly. No, it's enabling. It's tacit approval because they're not. We only have another minute or two. Depressed Canadian asking, weren't a lot of the unitary executive actions carried out under David Addington during W's administration? No.
The unitary executive has been around for a long time. It's a theory that really starts with Scalia and intellectuals in his orbit during the Meese Justice Department. And originally, it's a power of domestic power over hiring and firing. And essentially what it says is the president should have total control over everyone in the executive branch. The way the executive branch is organized currently, at least formally, is with lots of protection from political firing. The idea is we have laws on the books, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and civil servants' jobs is to carry out that legislation. So they shouldn't be fireable by a president just because he doesn't like them or doesn't want to follow the law. The idea is supposed to be the opposite. The president executes the law, doesn't make the law. Now, that's a kind of brief civics lesson, but this unitary executive says the opposite. No, the president should have total control. So Trump is using that now. Now, during the Bush White House, there was John Yoo and others used this theory to justify things like torture, which is itself horrific. But in some ways, they're going back now to the core idea, which is, as crazy as this sounds, it's even more dangerous than torture because it's stripping all of us of our democracy. That's what they're using this theory to do.
It's depressing, and yet I feel it has to be talked about openly. I'm glad you have this podcast. Again, I'll mention it. You are the co-host of the Oath and the Office podcast. The Oath and the Office is the title of Corey's book. But you can see now it's become a podcast with John Fugelsang, the handsome, funny John Fugelsang. And
we'll see you have Trump's tie here, cutting through the Constitution.
That's pretty wild. And there is Corey, the always bright, sharp, and clear-headed Corey Brettschneider. Again, the book, The Presidents and the People, 5 leaders who threatened democracy and the citizens who fought to defend it. And the reason that book might be something that is of interest to you if you're listening or watching is because, as you've just heard, history's instructive. And there are cases that actually draw out ways in which there has been pushback on situations that are, have seemed as dire as the one we're in. Right, Corey?
That's what thank you, Mark. And I'd say, I want to be honest, both in the podcast and I am in the book, about the history and the danger. At the founding, Patrick Henry said, if you ratify this thing, you're assuming a good person in power. What if you have a bad president? What if you have a criminal president? All of these supposed checks on executive power, impeachment, the courts, they're not going to work. But the hopeful part of the book and the podcast is that citizen power has worked. We push back against presidents like Adams, like Buchanan, who enabled the destruction of all rights, actually, for Black Americans under the Constitution. And we've won in a specific way, which is getting behind recovery presidents. And leading up to the midterms and to the next presidential election, that's what I'm going to continue to do, is work with people like you and John Fugelsang and try to build a democratic constitutional constituency, as they call it in the book. I outline the way to do it. These aren't just inspiring figures. They give us the roadmap specifically to recovery. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book and in the podcast too.
That's great. I'm going to add the podcast immediately, although it sounds like you've already got a considerable amount of momentum, which is really great. And you'll come visit again. I mean, people in the chat who weren't aware of you now are, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation, and we'll get into more. As I say, the book is so instructive in so many ways, so I'd like to get into that. And sadly, this administration is serving up problems and legal issues like a short order chef. So we'll have plenty to talk about. Thanks a lot, Corey.
Thanks a million, Mark. It's always a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Corey Brettschneider, everybody. See you.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
Right on, everybody. Right on. We've got a full hour to go. We're a live show. We come to you every day from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the East. Yes, little something for the East. I love it. And from 11 to 1 on the West Coast. Now, there you go. And you can do all the arithmetic in between. Tomorrow, it looks as though Albert and I will drop for you the brackets with the drops for March Madness. And so the commissioner of March Madness, because every tournament needs a commissioner.
Why are you yelling?
And so Albert is our commissioner. And Albert has experience. He's been our commissioner now for years for March Madness.
Albert, thank you.
And tomorrow begins March Madness. Gosh, Albert, you've got to have this sense of anticipation. This could be your best offering yet. A couple of things are different this year than in years past.
Now, March Madness.
Yes, okay. Yeah, well, you'll be, but the idea, Albert, is that many of the winners, and in fact, the winner from last year will not be on this year. We're taking them also. It's going to be a full, I don't know if say new field, but I think a lot of new sounds, a lot of new drops for you.
A lot of new sounds, and we're going to have all of them in a podcast form and probably a video form too, so you can listen to it and hear it and get all the instructions of how to participate. Because a lot of people are new. Mark, you have over 100-something thousand subscribers now.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. And maybe some of them will want to play March Madness with us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the tradition every year we do it. So in addition to the heavy political talk, the heavy news talk, we tell you the tough stories, we tell you the happy stories, with the uplifting, depressing. March Madness will happen. It's like the Postal Service. You know how they deliver through the snow and the sleet and the gloom of night, Kim? You know,
Right.
you heard. Are you familiar with that,
Albert,
Kim?
thank you.
Are you?
Kim, how are you?
All right.
Chit, chit.
Chit, chit, chit is a drop. I don't know if that'll make it. Chit, chit, chit may be retired.
I think we will have another Kim one in there, though. I just
Yeah.
off of what we've been talking about off air, but
Yeah, I think we'll find another Kim drop that we will add. And speaking of drops, on this, we have some of our drops on the mugs. There's never been anything like this as this mug. It's the, yeah, I know. We don't love
Never
the guy,
been
but
anything like this.
Thank you, exactly. So it's, I don't know. It's, I do it with some, shall I say, misgivings.
I love Tesla.
I might, you know, I'm just,
Good stuff.
This is this Coachella Valley coffee. There it is, and neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Wow. Albert, do you think you can live up to that kind of decree? Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night can keep the commissioner from starting March Madness on time on Monday, dropping the brackets. The bracket drops tomorrow, right? Or is it over the weekend? When does it drop?
it'll drop after Monday, because Monday we will preview how the voting works with our play-ins. We're going to have some extra drops just competing to get into the tournament.
So everybody will have a chance to learn how to do it, and then Monday we'll walk you through it a little bit on the show, and then after that it'll be March Madness, and it's going to be yes, it'll be great. Yeah, and you'll enjoy it. I promise you. It's a no wagering though.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Coming up, we have the Brilliant Legal Mind. We've already had one Brilliant Legal Mind. There is a second who is a regular on Thursdays. He's the great David Katz, who comes along soon. There was that major announcement that from a judge ruling in the case of all the discharged federal workers, and not all of them.
Probationary ones.
But the probationary workers now do have to be rehired. And the judge is saying, and they need to be rehired right away. Now, that decision will likely be, it'll be appealed, will it not?
Yeah, likely.
Yeah. Speaking of judges and such, I'd love to will you let me shoehorn a law and disorder in here? I have the pardoning of more corruption from this administration. I have a slashing of a department very much involved with corruption from this administration. And I have more in the way of disorder. So can I get to that? I still want to get to tariffs. Albert, I turn to you, and Kim, I turn to you in a public huddle. What do I do first? Law and disorder or discussion of tariffs?
I think whatever the shorter option would be, because it's already 12:10, and I think Katz. Usually, when we do these things, we start the segment and Katz joins immediately. So
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to pop in any second.
All right. With that, let me get to the tariffs and the warning from the Canadians. All right.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Nobody is safe, say the Canadians. They are sending the world a warning. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly, has said, if the U.S. can do this to us, their closest friend, then nobody is safe. During a press conference addressing Trump's tariff retaliation against Canada, Joly reiterated that Canada is, quote, holding strong, and described the president's actions as a day-to-day fight. We have done nothing to justify Trump's attacks on our country, she says, or on our economy and our identity. Canada is your best friend, your best neighbor, and your best ally. And she's right about that. The quote continues, the only constant in this unjustifiable trade war seems to be President Trump talking of annexing our country through economic coercion. He called our border a fictional line and repeated his disrespectful 51st state rhetoric. Well, Canadians have made it very clear, she says, that we will not back down and we will not give in to this coercion. She went on to talk about the long-established history and relationship between America and Canada. She described it as the envy of the world. I mean, I think it's the longest undefended border in the world. I mean, that should tell you about the relationship between the two countries. It is loathsome that Trump is beginning this tariff battle. Mostly, I guess you could say, if he's really serious about annexing Canada, I mean, that I guess would be the very worst thing. But of just the idea and following through on it in any way. I mean, even just entering it into conversation is pretty disgusting. But also, the tariffs are going to be a real issue. I mean, the back and forth is going to hurt both countries. But Trump knows, or must know, that he can really bring Canada to its knees. The economy of Canada can't withstand a serious trade war with the U.S. I mean, I think it would be a serious issue that would likely call into question a lot of things about the strength of Canada's economy once the U.S. beats up on it. Now, once the U.S. beats up on it after a while, you have the EU, which is already talking about tariffs on American goods. You have the EU essentially joining Canada in this tariffs war. I mean, it is a true, bizarre, and unproductive diplomatic and economic strategy to get into a trade war with Canada and the EU. I don't see any end game that serves any goal. Now, to the craziness, there is talk that Trump really is serious about annexing Canada. It's absurd on so many levels that I'm only going to spend a couple of seconds on it right now. We can get into it in greater detail later. But you are dealing with some aspects of this policy which are so laughable so as to just increase the absurdity. There'd be no way logistically to do this. These people are in no way indicating they want this. So this is really I don't know, it's the reflexive utterance of a crazy king, if you want to think of it that way. And the other thing I would say is, and this is just a footnote, dude, you already have a couple of territories, and in the case of Washington, D.C., a district, it's the District of Columbia, that both want to join the United States as states. So you have 51 and 52. They are on the waiting list, okay? District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. And both of them, in my judgment, are entitled to be getting statehood. They pay federal taxes. The District of Columbia is under the thumb of the federal government, and it's disgusting the way this city, which is already mismanaged, this District of Columbia, I grew up there. It's already mismanaged. But the idea that the feds come in there and they mismanage it some more, it's horrible. And the only reason, and underscore only reason, that the District of Columbia isn't a state is what? It would be a Democratic state. It's overwhelmingly populated by Democrats. So they don't want a voting Democratic state to be the 51st state. Similarly with Puerto Rico, they don't want this Commonwealth, I think it's a Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, they don't want it to be the 52nd state or the 51st state for the same reason. It would tip the political balance. So the Canada thing, it's ridiculous.
We hear from a Canadian below.
Yeah. The Canadian says, I am a Canadian national and have been outraged by this dual attack on my beloved native land. How anyone, especially politicians, can joke about the 51st state crap is even more galling. I agree with you 100%. Mm-hmm. It's loathsome. It's disgusting. But so is the trade war. I mean, the trade war that he's begun is ridiculous as well. So this is to be continued, but there are increasing signs that this is really something that, of course, Trump has not only started, but now takes personally. So the back and forth, he is now sort of in his mind is amplifying to the point that he has to come back with even greater tariffs. So the larger the tariffs that are retaliatory, the more his retaliatory on top of their retaliatory will be. And this is how the cycle of trade wars cripples everybody. So Depressed Canadian says with a $10 super chat, CTV reported that Trump is planning on annexing by force southern Ontario, which would be a state. It would be a territory held hostage. That's a Putin-type move. I can't imagine it would happen, but there are a lot of things that are happening right now that I would not have imagined. So I will say this, just to put this stuff that we wouldn't imagine in a separate category, and then I want to get to David Katz. I did imagine.
Ooh, it looks like Mark is frozen in time.
Oh no, you can't.
No, he's good. He's good on my end.
Oh, is he okay? So I would have imagined the dismantling of government under Trump. They sort of articulated that that's what they wanted to do, and so in that sense, the unimaginable is something that really was talked about. We talked about it on this show. We've talked about it in the context of several different things in the past. So in that sense, I'm not really surprised. But I would put into the category of unimaginable the forcible annexation of any of Canada. I would put that in a completely separate category of unimaginable. I don't think it to be something that could happen. Now, again, I might get a cold slap in the face, but that's the way I see it right now, and I hope I'm right. So,
The Mark Thompson Show.
One of the leading legal analysts in the English-speaking world. You hear him on London radio, you see him on London TV. David Katz joins us from America to help sort out what's happening with Donald Trump. You hear him on New Zealand and Australia, and then, of course, here in this country on News Nation and on Fox News Channel. We're so happy he joins us on Thursdays. The former federal prosecutor, now a defense attorney. David Katz, everybody.
Great to be with you.
David, there was a key ruling by a judge just today ordering the rehiring of many of these probationary workers that were discharged. It was one of the first acts that Musk and Trump saw fit to enact. So they discharged all of these workers. The unions basically contested it, and now the judge has ruled in the favor of those employees discharged. Can you speak to that?
Well, yes, it's an important ruling. You know, one thing, Mark, since January 20th, there's been a lot of people, obviously, who've been very pessimistic, very down. And of course, Trump and Musk have hurt a lot of people's lives. You just can't minimize how much pain and cruelty has been caused unnecessarily. But we pointed out that a lot of it was being caused in violation of the law, in violation of our constitutional separation of powers, in violation of all kinds of regulations. And now we've had literally over 90% of the rulings go against Trump and Musk, when you really step back from this, you see that the rule of law is working in America, and that a lot of it was shock and awe so that people would be panicked. And of course, it worked. People didn't have enough savings. They didn't have enough, confidence that the rule of law would hold. And with all of Trump's bravado and braggadocio and Musk's and his minions, rooting around in computer systems and everything else, that they wouldn't fix things in a way that they couldn't get unfixed. And I'm still worried about some of that. But court after court, Mark, has stood up for our rights. They've stood up for the civil service. And this is, of course, a great ruling. I think this is the one by Judge Alsup in the San Francisco. And, if I could just digress for 1 second, as I said to people at the time that Carter passed away, and I did a lot of the shows about former President Carter, I was with Carter. I was in Carter's administration, despite, as I said then, joking, don't let my youthful appearance persuade anybody that I wasn't with Jimmy Carter, because it was wonderful. I was in my late 20s. And because I worked in the office of the Solicitor General, which argues cases for the administration in the U.S. Supreme Court, I got to meet some of the most outstanding lawyers in America. One of the ones I met was William Alsup. We played on the same softball team in the summer of 1980. And here he is, a fantastic federal judge, always been very fair, brilliant, deals with all those tech cases, up there in the Bay Area. And he got this one, and he really hit it out of the park, ruling correctly that because someone, let's say, is a probationary employee, that's not a reasonable basis under the civil service to dismiss them. All you're really doing is the spoils system. All you're really doing is saying a person hired in the last year or two, I can get rid of because I'm the new administration, and I'm going to hire people who are more to my liking, because I'm going to hire people, me, Trump, me, whoever's running my agencies now, more to my liking than the people that President Biden and the heads of his agencies hired a year or two ago. It's nonsense. Some of these people are absolutely excellent. Some of them are in supervisory positions, Mark, while still on probationary status. They've worked up to show how standing they are, and they're in charge of units at this point. Anyway, all of that, and so it applies to all these different agencies. There's no basis for so many of these firings. His order has reinstated thousands of people into their jobs. Now, there are some people who took the buyout. The buyout was legal, at least until they defraud these people and don't pay them as they said they would. But the buyouts are fine. But the other people, hopefully they had some savings. Hopefully they hung in there. Many of them have left government service. We've lost them forever. They've gone to state governments, or they've gone to private concerns, private industry. And we, the federal government, and we, the federal voters, are never getting them back into service, no matter how wonderful they were working for us. But the ones who've hung in there have their jobs back immediately. And of course, they say that they may appeal this. But I think the Ninth Circuit, which would hear the appeal, is unlikely to grant a stay. I think these people will be reinstated immediately, because I think the balance of equities is in their favor. They've lost jobs. They're probably near not being able to pay their mortgages anymore. I think the balance of equities is in favor of reinstating them. I think if the Ninth Circuit rules against the Trump administration and does not stay their reinstatement, their only thing is to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court and say this is an absolute dire emergency. And so far, the U.S. Supreme Court has said in these emergency appeals brought by the Trump administration, no, it's not really that much of an emergency. So hopefully they'll all be reinstated within days. These are all big jobs. These are not only at the Defense Department, Department of Veterans Affairs, all throughout the government. So, and of course, things will run again. Maybe we can go to our national parks this summer, Mark. We'll have our Forest Service reinstated, as well as other very essential jobs, HHS, across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to just see, some of it patched back together. I'm quite concerned about gutting the EPA. I'm a tree hugger, so for me, I think clean air and clean water and clean soil, that is to say, pure soil, these are things that represent America. I think this myth of American exceptionalism always led us to believe when we were kids that we had those things. And now, as it turns out, I mean, really corporate polluters and all the rest who really own our political system, they have seen to it otherwise. But more on that another time.
Can I interject one thing real quick,
Sure.
Mark? Real quick. MSNBC did a great expose last night of just one EPA matter down in what they call Cancer Alley in Louisiana. And, for a lot of us, we think, this is so awful what Trump and the rest of them plan to do to the environment. But he'll be gone in 3.5 years. His Congress, it looks like, will be gone in 1.5 years. And somehow we'll survive. Somehow we'll get the planet back in shape 1.5 years from now, 3.5 years from now. These are people who are suffering terribly. They're getting cancer. They have huge rates of cancer down there. They're near a plant that I don't want to mention their name here, but it's all on the MSNBC report. And the EPA had tried to rein in the huge amount of cancer pollution that is being caused by this mega plant down in, I think it's in Louisiana. Of course, what just happened? Trump dismissed the lawsuit. So the civil lawsuit brought by EPA to rein in the pollution from this cancer-producing plant. It's almost all poor African-American people living near it. Everybody who's got enough money has managed to flee because no one in their right mind wants to live near there. And the EPA was doing something about it under Biden. Now they're doing nothing about it as of the Trump administration just dismissing the appeal. So it's imminent. The harm is imminent. This is not just global warming 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. It's imminent harm. And the EPA is being hamstrung by Trump all over the country. And so you're not just a tree hugger. You're a person who's getting cancer hugger. These are real human beings all over the country who are suffering these awful toxins that Biden was doing something about. Our biggest problem used to be whether Biden made it up the stairs or not. And now the country has quite a few new problems, don't we?
Yeah, no, it's true. And the toxification of all of those that I mentioned, the air, the water, the soil, it's an affront to humanity. It's an affront to who we are. And that you shouldn't be able to put a price tag on that. You shouldn't be able to buy a politician and then be able to spew tons and tons of pollutants into the air and produce these cancers in kids and in young people. It's horrifying. And in older people, as we are exposed to it for decades. And by the way, just on that, I mean, down in that area, Louisiana, Texas, Houston area, they have more Superfund sites down there, EPA declared Superfund sites, totally toxified, in other words, than any other place in the country. So this is an area that really has taken it on the chin over and over again.
If that doesn't topple Speaker Johnson, he may not have a safe seat. If this environmental harm doesn't have a huge rallying cry to people to vote against him, guess what? Medicaid in his district is going to be cut, and he's one of the districts. It's a fairly poor Louisiana. They really need Medicaid really bad. And of course, Medicaid is about to hit the chopping block, is hitting the chopping block so that they can give huge tax breaks to the super wealthy and those huge corporations down there that operate in Louisiana and offshore. And that may be enough. Louisiana, Huey Long, all that kind of stuff, it'll blow your mind. Suddenly it's Republican. The next thing you know, they voted Democrat because they just had it. The Republicans down there are just too graspy and greedy. And it's enough that a Democrat suddenly wins it. Might be Speaker Johnson's seat. What a loss!
Interesting.
What a loss.
But when you talk about the House, gerrymandering really is so powerful that it's really hard to unseat some of these people. But as you say, it's not completely out of the question. I wanted to ask you about what's happening at the Justice Department with this section that handles public corruption. I was just seeing this piece in the Post. Prosecutors in the Justice Department section that handles public corruption cases have been told the unit will be significantly reduced in size, and its cases will be transferred to the U.S. attorney's offices around the country. The discussion about shrinking the public integrity section comes weeks after the unit's leadership resigned when a top Justice Department official ordered the dropping of corruption charges against New York Mayor Eric Adams. So the end of the Biden administration, there were about 30 prosecutors in this section that was handling public corruption. It was created in 1976 after the Watergate scandal to oversee criminal prosecution of federal public corruption cases across the country. But now, prosecutors are being told that they'll be asked to take new assignments in the department, and as few as 5 lawyers may remain in that unit. So this is, I put it in the category of the discharging of all those inspectors general. The people who are on the beat, the cops on the beat to root out corruption, they're being dismissed or they're having their units completely closed down by this administration. This is just the latest.
Well, that office in Washington, D.C., quite an elite office it came to be. The idea of it being decimated is obviously not good for people who care about there not being public corruption. And I think the idea is that, Trump, this Bondi, this Kash Patel, we're all really worried, not just if you're a Democrat or Republican, but people who care about there not being public corruption are worried that they'll put their finger on the scales in so many ways. And the only public corruption cases you'll see will be against enemies, against Democrats, against people who are outspoken against the Trump administration. That'll suddenly be the big, oh my God, that person got 2 Super Bowl tickets. Well, we're going after public corruption big time. Meanwhile, billions of dollars just got, somehow, this thing where Musk just got this big contract that some other company just got, it looks like. And what is going on with that? I don't know that that's public corruption, but that's certainly the kind of thing that people look into and see what the facts and the law, lead to. Not 2 Super Bowl tickets, but you can always trump up that you're doing a lot about public corruption. And lo and behold, it seems to always be your enemies, right? You said that great statement one time, for our enemies, the law; for our friends,
everything. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're worried about that. But I think by sending it to the local U.S. attorneys, and I have, great respect for the U.S. Attorney's Office that I worked for in Los Angeles. But as you go around the country with the 94 different U.S. Attorney's offices, I guess if you were craven, venal, cynical looking at this, you would think that the local Republicans that have a lot of power, some local Democrats too, but you're worried in this situation because the Republicans are in control of everything, that the local Republicans in whatever district you want to think of who are committing public corruption, that the U.S. attorney there, friend of the senator in the Republican place, all of them appointed by the Trump administration, all of them apparently given some political litmus test. I mean, yes, every administration has a political litmus test, but what it's been so far, let's say in the Central District of California, in my district, Los Angeles, a huge Los Angeles, Orange County area here, is a totally competent person, a totally distinguished person that you trust, whether a Democrat or Republican, to call a public corruption case on the law and the facts. And the idea is that a lot of local U.S. attorneys' offices, they may think now, will not call it against the local official. The local official will have a lot of influence, Mark, in the local area more than they would back in Washington, D.C. Yes, they could try to tube the case or invent a case in the Washington, D.C. public corruptions, but you figure that office is more insulated from local political influence. And so it is not good for fighting public corruption to send it to each individual U.S. attorney's office. Let me give you one example, because one of the big cases in the Carter administration was the AB scam. In the AB scam, there were some Congress members who had taken these bribes, and the reason for the bribes was to get a private bill for immigration. So somebody who wasn't eligible to come to this country. Now, since then, if you have $1 million to invest, boom, 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 you get immigration papers. But in those days, no, you didn't just get immigration papers because you invested a lot of money. So there were private bills. You would get a Congress member or senator to carry your private bill. And Joe Blow would be granted a green card, or Joe Blow would get some special immigration privilege. And that was, if there was some basis for that. But the basis for that in AB scam was that these Arab sheikhs were willing to pay $50,000 or $100,000, and they gave it in cash to various Congress members. Now, of course, because it was President Carter and he was such a straight arrow, he ended up indicting mainly, or having his Justice Department, or his Justice Department did indict mainly Democrats. And that's not something that's going to happen with Trump. If Trump and Bondi did the same thing, or if Bondi did the same thing and indicted like 5 Democrats and 1 Republican, they would change the composition of the House, Mark, if all of them got indicted and convicted in the next year or two. That is not about to happen. In fact, you'll see that some Republican politician just got a pardon. He just got sprung from jail faster than with a helicopter by Trump's pardon power. Mind-boggling. But I'm digressing. The point is...
No, I was going to get to that. It was the Tennessee congressman.
Let me get this. But the point is that the public integrity section is the one that carried the ball in the AB scam cases against the local Congress members. My judge had Congressman Jenrette. He was a New South guy, and he had, he was on tape. Convicted and sentenced to about 2 years in prison when it was all said and done. So were other Democratic members of Congress. But the point was, it wasn't the U.S. attorney in South Carolina who indicted and carried the ball against Congressman Jenrette. Some of the cases were in Philadelphia, in New York. It wasn't the New York, Southern District of New York, Eastern District of New York. It wasn't the district in Philadelphia that carried the ball. It was that public integrity section, and they had prosecutors who knew public corruption cases, law inside and out. They fought all these motions. They all had great lawyers, all of the Congress members. They were fascinating cases. So I think without the public integrity section being a real force, I don't think they're going to get as many corrupt politicians as they ought to get.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real setback, it sounds like. There's a watchdog group that is raising concerns about whether the FAA's business with Elon Musk's Starlink violates conflict of interest laws. Remember conflict of interest laws? It seems so quaint. It seems so hour ago. The Campaign Legal Center wrote in a letter to the Transportation Department's Inspector General that Musk, quote, blatantly and improperly influenced the FAA's work with Starlink. Comes under criticism recently after reports that the Trump administration was considering canceling Verizon's $2.4 billion contract in favor of Musk's satellite communications firm. Can you comment on that?
Well, Adam Smith said he believed greatly in capitalism, but the truth was, if you got three capitalists in a room together, they would set prices. In other words, if you really believe in capitalism, which I do, that you need to have stringent regulation. It has to be for real. People who are willing to commit business crimes have to have a good prospect of getting caught. They have to understand they have a good prospect of getting caught, of being prosecuted. And of course, part of this is that when we say there ought to be these laws and there ought to be conflict of interest and it ought to have consequences, there have to be real human beings working in the government who are going to make sure it has consequences. And my view of Musk is that he has tried to make all of these regulators, all the people who would hold him to account in the government, flinch, think, you better not go after me. If it looks like a righteous investigation, don't investigate it because you'll be harmed. I'll figure out a way to harm you. Look what just happened right now. All these agencies that investigated me, sometimes it was for chump change. You would think that with good lawyers, he would have just said, it's just part of doing business. There's going to be regulations. There's going to be fines. If I blow up my rocket, his latest rocket, was not a resounding success. Neither was his rocket before it. They both blew up, Mark. One of them blew up high in the sky over Florida, and there was so much debris they had to close the airport in Orlando, in Miami. Can you imagine? Flight delayed. You have to sleep overnight here. Flight delayed because of Musk space debris. Is someone doing anything about that? Is someone about to do something about that? Or are they going to flinch because they're going to figure, you know what? My job could be at risk. My pension could be at risk.
Let me just, and apologies for interrupting, but just put a fine point on that. That's a point that I've made here over and over again, and regular listeners and viewers know. I talked about the fact that Musk went after the FAA right away. Why did he go after the FAA? Went after USAID and the FAA for personal reasons. Both those agencies were involved in investigations and in fining regulatory fines because of what David Katz is talking about right now. The explosion of those rockets, they had to reroute air traffic, they had to close down airports. This is stuff that there is a penalty associated with. And so Musk came in, he went after the FAA head, he decapitated that head, and then he fired a bunch of people at the FAA for just this reason. It was personal. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they seem to have made up that story that it was a DEI thing because there was a female traffic controller. I mean, this is outrageous. Are people paying attention to what's going on? They say his poll numbers are going down. Trump's. Why would a professional woman who maybe was tempted to vote for Trump or did vote for Trump, you know what an insult? Think about what an insult that is, that there was a crash at DC National because they gave the traffic controller job to a woman because it was a DEI woman traffic controller. There's no evidence at all that this woman was incompetent or did anything wrong whatsoever. And who's rectified that? What Republican senator has said this is an outrage? Let me just not get started on the tariffs for the moment. But the thing that I can't believe is that so many red states border Canada, And I can't believe that these red state senators think that they're going to somehow get reelected when, on top of all their other problems, now they've incurred righteously, properly, the hatred, the scorn of the Canadians, because what we're doing to Canada in their name, they could stop all of this from happening. If 4 Republican senators went to Trump and they said, we're not buying into the program anymore unless you rectify this, that, and the other thing, that would be it. They 4 Republican senators would join with all the other Democrats. I hope Fetterman is still staying strong. But all the other Democratic senators, we hope, and just 4. They need the 2 from Alaska. They need McConnell. They need 1 more. And they could tell Trump, no, we're not buying into this. You need to be a normal president. You need to stop doing all of these things, which, oh, by the way, has anyone looked at their stock account recently?
No, I mean, nothing good is happening economically. This is an interesting question Robert Martin asked. Could anyone who was delayed by that rocket explosion that you were talking about, David Katz, sue Trump or sue Musk for damages?
Well, yes, I think that the class actions are probably already starting on that score. You create a harm. It's a civil wrong. It's a tort. People sue over that, right? And the idea that you can go around because you're Musk or because you're a friend of the president or because you used to be the richest man in the world. The joke is, sorry that the economy has been totally destroyed, but it's hurting Musk too. That great joke, but it's hurting Musk too. Doesn't really, not much of a balm for the BALM for the people who just lost, a third of their life savings. My God, and their pensions gone down so much. But of course you are able to sue for that. And the FAA ought to extract all the penalties that are appropriate in this situation. But will they flinch? Will they be scared? Will they think, wow, I want to pay my mortgage next month? Because that's what I believe Musk is trying to. That's what's worth losing the $100 and some billion on Tesla. By the way, Mark, I hope you haven't gotten any more grief about your Tesla.
Well, I ordered these magnets that you put on, which first of all, I'm dumping the car in a couple of months when the lease is up. But secondly,
don't sell too cheap. Don't sell too cheap.
I'm just going to turn the car back in. But there are these magnets you can put on the back of the car that say, I got this before he turned, before I realized he was a whatever, I mean, they're kind of clever. And so I ordered 2 of them. So I'll put them on the back of the car. But
half my neighborhood, which voted strong, Sherman Oaks voted strongly in the hills, but still voted strongly for Biden. Half my neighbors have Teslas.
Well, I mean, just because you brought it up, the reality is Musk, if he cares about Tesla sales, he has completely shot himself in the foot. I mean, Tesla is a brand adopted most aggressively by Democrats and libs. So you've lost all those libs, okay? And you will see evidence of having lost them because they are turning their cars in droves. I mean,
well, he thinks Trump will help him steal more money than he's losing on Tesla. But I don't think that's true. I've said that from the beginning. Everything he does, yeah, he's going to make some government employees flinch. Of course he is. That's what they try to do. But there's so many who are strong conscience, strong sense of duty. And it's not because it's Musk they're going after. It's because a huge rocket just blew up and caused a lot of damage to people. You got to pay for that. If he's not entitled to that business, that Starlink is trying to get that business away from some competitor.
Verizon.
That's going to be scrutinized. There are boards. The boards aren't just going to go away. We've seen with the courts, Mark, the courts didn't go away. The courts have really stood strong.
I hope you're right. I mean, it seems as though he has his way, but we'll see. I do think that Trump, if he has to, will try to engineer a bailout for Elon Musk. He will engineer a bailout for the farmers that are going to be hurt by these tariffs. That's what he did the first time. He had tariffs in his first administration, and those farmers, it was with China, who were most affected by those tariffs, he bailed them out with taxpayer money. So all this money that he's talking about that's going to be coming in with tariffs, a lot of that money, I mean, when I say a lot, I mean, I think the numbers are like 85 to 90% directed toward bailing out a lot of the farmers and businesses most affected by the tariffs, the punishing tariffs. And those farmers, they want to actually do business. They're not looking for a check from the government, but that check from the government will likely be coming because Trump is trying to sort of soften that blow. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did the same thing for Tesla.
Congress has to vote the money. And there is a streak still in the Republican Party of just not spend, spend, spend. So I think that the right wing that doesn't want to just, the sort of Tea Party types, the ones who are for real, who care about the budget. I mean, the budget is just exploding beyond belief. And think about it. We're not at war with anybody. Why is the budget just exploding and exploding? It's got to hit the conservative voters that this is not the right way to go. And, they want to spend all this money on this deportation, which would also raise prices, also be bad for the country in so many ways besides the human dimension of it. And that would cost an awful lot of money. We just had this latest fiasco in Guantanamo, where they did this big show of taking the worst of the worst, which was a lie, to Guantanamo. And you and I said at the time, this is a ridiculous waste of money. Well, guess what? There's apparently hundreds or even thousands of military who were deployed over there to get ready for the huge nothing burger that it's become. They wasted, it's going to be billions of dollars just for the press angle, right? Of what they were doing. And they brought the people back. It doesn't make any sense to have people imprisoned at Guantanamo. You got to bring in all the food. You got to bring in all of this. You got to construct that. You got to bring in the military. Huge waste of money. And I tell you, his voters are going to realize this is all the show, so I think one of the court opinions said, yeah, it's an interesting show. It's like Alice in Wonderland. And yes, it's fascinating to watch Alice in Wonderland. But, every day seeing what the Red Queen is going to do. We're tired of seeing what Orange Man is going to do. Even his own viewers, it's not WWF. Watch WWF if you like that sort of entertainment. Trump is not entertaining anymore, especially when your own nest egg is going down and when your Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security are being threatened. It's not funny anymore.
Of course, you're right. But the reality is that he comes from that world where it's all about the announcement. It's reality TV. It's the WWE, as you say. So that's why he loves the tariffs. He can announce the tariffs. He can announce that they're rolling them back. He can announce that they're reinstating them again. He can make all of these pronouncements and announcements. He loves that. Performance art. I've said it forever. He plays president. That's what he's doing. It's the theater of it. Why does he have all his meetings with heads of state? Just did it with the Irish guy, does it with Zelensky, etc. He does it in front of cameras because it's more than just a photo op. I mean, I understand. Biden used to do that thing. You shake hands, you smile, they take pictures, answer a question or two. Trump does a whole thing because he likes playing the media, and he is good at it. But again, much of what he does is driven by the announcement and the pronouncement. So I really take your point to heart on that. Although even as your other point is he's losing his support. I want to quickly, before I lose you, David Katz, ask you about something that really is specific to a law firm. There was an executive order that targeted this week this law firm of Perkins and Cole, and they have done work for Democrats, and as a result, Donald Trump, through this executive order, has been targeting this law firm, and now a federal judge has temporarily frozen part of that executive order that targeted that firm, Perkins Cole. It's weird, and I also you've explained before the Arnold and Porter thing. You can go through the different law firms in Washington. Some are associated with Democratic causes, some are associated with Republican-backed causes. But I've never really heard of an administration taking retaliatory action in the form of executive order toward one of these firms.
This is absolutely unprecedented, and it will not stand even before the U.S. Supreme Court. But of course, the administration can do a lot of damage, even to a huge law firm in the interim. And they probably will inflict some damage on the Perkins law firm. They're originally a Seattle law firm. I think a lot of their work was representing Boeing. Boeing, of course, was America's largest exporter. Maybe it still is America's largest exporter. It is a prestige client that any group of lawyers would want to have. And this Perkins firm having this grew into a national law firm. And part of their practice, which, these national law firms, I think by now they have well over 1,000 lawyers. They have over 2,000 support staff. They're a big company as well as being a law firm. I guess part of the work that they did was for Hillary Clinton's law firm. Supposedly they worked on this famous the word's not the famous collusion thing. What was
Right.
that?
The Steele dossier, the fusion GPS
dossier,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
And it was one of the things that they had to investigate. If you're a lawyer, you have to conscientiously investigate the law and the facts, the things that help you, that hurt you. If there's some document out there, you want to see it. You want to deal with it. And again,
for those who I'm sure most remember, but just for those who might not, that supposedly that Steele dossier contained unflattering information and details and evidence against Donald Trump.
Every comedian in the world was happy to have the P-tape on there, and they could do their take on the P-tape, and then the P-tape became this huge thing. Was it true? Wasn't it true? Did Putin really have it? And all this kind of stuff. And they tried to actually discredit so much of the information about the oligarchs and the collusion, the conspiracy, and everything else, because, well, the P-tape was wrong. Everything was wrong. It was all a big lie. It was all a big lie, like the P-tape was a lie. Anyway, so this law firm now Trump is trying to basically bar this law firm in certain ways. Now, we've never had anything like this, Mark, because first of all, a law firm is not its clients. I always say I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I do the very, very best that I can for my clients. But at the end of the day, it's my client who's done what the client has done or not done. It's not me. I'm an advocate. This totally loses the perspective, of course, because Trump has never been a lawyer, never really understood what lawyers do, that, they're not Roy Cohns, but he sees them all as Roy Cohns. So, of course, in his, nightmarish vision of it, they're all a bunch of Roy Cohns over at that firm. But on the other side, 1,200 of them and all their 2,500 support staff. So basically what he said is that the government all these agencies have to say whether any of them hire Perkins for anything. Well, what do you think Trump wants to know, whether any government agency, any government anything is hiring Perkins Co. or dealing with this Perkins Co. for anything? Well, the reason is to blackball them. The reason is to destroy their practice. On top of that, he's issued this funny order. It's just absurd that they can't go on any government property. He's his unitary executive. He's the president. He's executing the laws. He doesn't want any of those lawyers that he doesn't like on any government property. Now, you could go into courthouses. He can't bar you from courthouses. But, Mark, if I could just, because I find this so interesting, it's so novel, that, I want to go back again to the experience after Carter was defeated by Reagan. After my law clerkship was over, that was almost a year into the Reagan administration, I was supposed to have a job at the U.S. State Department. That job had been, offered to me, and I had it. I was on delayed taking of the job. At the State Department, Office of Legal Advisor. Well, it became pretty clear that my job, while it was open under Carter, was not open under Reagan. It was just clear that the Reagan administration didn't want a guy who'd worked with a fellow who'd written the Panama Canal Treaty. That was like, that's sort of the politics of it. Yes, I should have gotten that job. I probably could have sued, and maybe I would have had a very noisy entrance into the Department of State, but who needs it? I was a young lawyer, so I went to the best Democratic leading law firm in Washington, D.C., Arnold & Porter, and Arnold & Porter's business was dealing with the government. Now, by then, it was the Reagan administration. Our business, the largest law firm in Washington, D.C., was dealing with the government, the Reagan administration. No one had any issue with that. I had a client down in Puerto Rico who wanted to fight a HUD grant. Me and the senior attorney on it, we went to see HUD. No one said, oh my God, you're with the Democrats. You can't come into the HUD building. You can't have a meeting with HUD staff. We made the best arguments that we could. Nobody had this idea. This idea is totally alien to our life. It's alien to other countries. They don't do this in other countries. When Germany goes from one party to another, when Great Britain goes from one party to another, the attorneys who represent companies don't suddenly not have dealings with the government. This is absurd because people have this experience with the government. And who would you want to hire? So you might say, well, what constitutional right? And people will change lawyers. You have a right to choose your own lawyer. And if you feel like your lawyer is not getting a positive reception, no one thought in the Reagan administration that we were not going to be given a proper audience because we were a Democratic leaning firm. But if they believe that, if Reagan, who did not ever say anything like that, but if Reagan and his attorney general had pounded away that was the way things were, then yes, certainly the huge corporations, we had Martin Marietta in those days. Martin Marietta was a defense contractor.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have kept us to deal
They
with
would have
the
pivoted away, and that's what they're saying right now, David. They're saying that this really could cost the law firm, its livelihood, meaning that the firm itself could go under because of the kind of it's not just a browbeating they're getting. I mean, an executive order was drafted targeting them.
First of all, a lot of people at that law firm are Republicans, and a lot of them are completely nonpartisan. And so I suppose that if the nightmare scenario is that there would be practice groups that would spin off, Mark. I mean, the reality of what would happen is there'd be practice groups that had nothing to do with representing Hillary Clinton. They would have to tell the world, we had nothing to do with Hillary Clinton. We want to still represent Martin Marietta in its problems.
Right.
But we want to represent, we had Big Tobacco. Yeah, we want to still represent Big Tobacco. Trump, Biden, we were here to
evil still needs a lawyer.
Evil still needs a lawyer.
I got to finish up, but I wanted to just get to the absurdity of this, and I want to run a theory past you and the audience. So here's the thing that is happening. The Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to allow it to push forward with plans to end birthright citizenship. The request was made in a series of emergency appeals just today. It argues that lower courts went too far when they handed down nationwide injunctions that blocked the policy. The administration is asking the court to limit the impact of those rulings. It comes as appeals courts, of course, have disregarded the White House's request to pause these rulings. And again, birthright citizenship seems like open and shut. And so, like, in other words, the SCOTUS, I don't care who's on SCOTUS, they're not going to overturn birthright citizenship and rule with this administration. So here's my theory, that they are working the refs a little bit. And by pushing this birthright citizenship, they are going to get it up to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS is going to rule against them. And there is this working the refs and working SCOTUS so that the next thing that comes before SCOTUS, they may be more inclined to rule with the administration. And the second aspect to this is they are signaling to their base, who are all anti-immigrant, that we're really pushing our anti-immigration mandate that you gave us. We're pushing it hard. So those two things are served by this kind of thing that we've seen today, by, again, petitioning the Supreme Court to allow it to push forward this administration with plans to end birthright citizenship.
I think that the administration under Trump just makes a lot of mistakes. I think that there are ones that they just do through stupidity. And just to tie up that point and the point about the big law firms, one of the reasons we never had that before with the big law firms, and people can take this the wrong way, that there's big law, there's all these kind of things. I had the option when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office to try to go to a bigger firm, one of the real, the big law firms. I like the idea of having my small practice, because just the conflict checks can knock you out of cases. There are cases that you can't do at a big law firm. This is one of the things with big law firms. You're at a big law firm, you have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of politics, anything, but you have this wonderful attorney who's left the Clinton administration, and they're so, the Clinton administration likes them so much. Hillary Clinton likes them so much, thinks you're the best lawyer in the world, and now this person's your law partner at big law. Hillary Clinton brings, her case to them, and before you know it, your firm is known as, or your firm has this problem, or you can't do this because your case, well, you might get a fee of $500,000, and people say, oh my God, $500,000 for one huge criminal case. That's not a big thing to one of these law firms. So a law firm with 1,200 lawyers, that's not a big thing. They tell you, we have a conflict with somebody else in another city, in one of our other offices. You can't take this case. And so there's all these issues about being in a big firm or a smaller firm. But the reality is that everybody would want to work at big law if they had the chance. And people have said this before, but it's true. This is the D team. Trump has the D team, the people who joined up with Trump and said, I want to be on Trump's side and not the other side. We're not the top lawyers in America. I'm very, very sorry. They're in power now, and they're probably not happy with what I just said on your show. But the reality is they are not la creme de la creme. They didn't get the best people. Every time you look at one of these legal analyses and say, this might have been this really clever Machiavellian thing that they did, it might also have been something stupid that the D team has just done.
So you think that I'm giving way too much credit to these guys?
I think this is just D team stuff. They're going to lose in the Supreme Court. And guess what? People aren't going to say, oh, well, the Supreme Court owes us one. They're going to say, wow, this was something that Trump went all around the country saying, doesn't he have anybody with a sense Doesn't have anyone to forget legal comprehension. How about reading comprehension? It says they're born in the United States, U.S. citizen. Then there's a U.S. Supreme Court case from 100 years ago, which tests the principle and says that a guy gets to be a U.S. citizen despite his parents, despite all of his problems in life. Why? He was born in the United States. It's as clear can be. The language of the Constitution is clear. Okay, you want to be an originalist? Read the original text. It says born in the United States, and then the Supreme Court precedent 100 years ago says born in the United States. Check, you're a citizen. And so it's just he's going to look foolish. And why he wants to look foolish sooner rather than later? He's already, he's spiraling down. And a U.S. Supreme Court loss. They'll play up the fact that the 3 justices who he tried to get appointed. Gorsuch isn't stupid or crazy. So he'll lose even the 3 Supreme Court justices that, as they always put it, the 3 picked by him voted against him on this one. It'll
be interesting to see what you think it'll be unanimous or no.
Thomas and Alito are.
They'll find a way. They'll find a way.
They seem to be so angry. Yeah, they seem to be so angry at the world, so polemical. And then, of course, all the corrupt allegations against Thomas. They thought Thomas might resign. I'm not sure that Trump is popular enough that he could get a Supreme Court justice through at this point.
So that's for another time, because I would disagree with you on that, but you know more about that stuff than I do. David, love our chat. Sorry that the clock's run out on us, but I look forward to next week. You can find David Katz across the English-speaking world in all those various media outlets, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time on Thursdays. Thank you, David.
Mark, I just meant that if Thomas were actually to resign at this point because they gave him such a sweetheart deal and something like a professorship that paid $10 million a year with, you meet one class once a week. I don't think that he could necessarily put somebody in his place, not if they were on this hard right agenda, and not if Trump, said this person will do this and that and the other thing. I don't think they want that fight anymore. I don't think that his popularity is really down, Mark. I mean, it's all over the country. And this stock thing, this latest thing, Mark, his popularity is down and going down, Trump says.
Yeah. Okay. All right. To be continued. David Katz. Thanks, David.
My pleasure.
Thanks, my friend.
The Mark Thompson Show.
I am always enlightened by that guy. Yeah. Counselor Katz. Appreciate your insights and expertise, says Underdog. Why are billionaires and millionaires so angry lately, says Rich. That's funny. I love that. Well, Kim, it's happened again.
What?
It's happened again.
Yeah, it has.
I'm sorry.
What?
I know what you mean. It's okay. I'm used to it now.
We had some great guests and great conversation, and that just took some time. Am I right, Albert? I mean, it's not the kind of thing that Kim should become, angry about or in any way.
I blame you.
All right. Well, I mean,
on this show, everybody puts a baby in the corner, and she's used to it.
Oh, wow.
I blame you.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry.
Okay. I've grown accustomed to the corner.
Depressed Canadian says, New York Magazine posted the article, quote, "Not Just Tariffs," about Trump's ambitions to redraw the Canada-U.S. border by force. He can't occupy the entire country, so he's after the border areas. Trump's policies often start out as jokes, Depressed Canadian says. Interesting. I'll read that New York Magazine piece. If you want me just to do a second on that, I will. I mean, I do think that there is a legit concern around the questions of annexing Canada. I think it gets more into fantasy land when you talk about a big kind of military push. But Trudeau has said, Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister, said, what he wants to see is a total collapse of the Canadian economy because that'll make it easier for him to annex us. That is what Trudeau is saying is the 3D chess, or not even 3D chess, of these tariffs. So, I mean, this is an unprecedented thing to have both leaders talk openly about the annexation, have Trump talk about the 51st state and kind of hammer it, and then have Trudeau sort of respond to it. And he's speaking about it in kind of substantive ways, like this is what Trump's trying to do, run us down economically so he can make his move.
Can I add in that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says Canada becoming a U.S. state is the best way to merge the United States and Canada's economies.
Lutnick will say whatever the F Trump wants him to say. He's unbelievable. And for a billionaire, he is one of the biggest suck-ups. And he doesn't even play it down the middle. He is a great Trump supplicant who just gets out there and will sling whatever Trump has put in his glove to sling. It's unbelievable. But it's extraordinary to me. I mean, this is true. We'll talk about this a lot more, but before the Super Bowl, in that interview with, was it Brett Baer? Trump said that annexing Canada is a real thing. And he says Canada, this is Trump speaking, is, quote, not viable as a country without U.S. trade. Without U.S. trade. So again, I'm going to say something, and don't be angry. This is true, what Trump is saying, that Canada needs the U.S. trade, okay? They're very dependent on, these cross-border exchanges. If you were to completely derail these cross-border trades that have gone on uninterrupted, and we are good trading partners with Canada, you could, I mean, if it became severe enough, you could break the Canadian economy. I mean, I think in large measure, you could certainly damage it substantially. I don't know that Trump is great to me to think that he may, but I'll tell you one thing, he's begun this whole trade war without regard to any specifics that Canada could possibly speak to or satisfy. The fentanyl thing is total garbage. I mean, no fentanyl comes in from Canada. I mean, not literally none, but almost literally none. I mean, I don't think you could fill this room with the fentanyl that comes in from Canada. So he just threw in fentanyl. So as this whole thing got started, he's not even really clear about what is motivating this trade war. And it's damaging to the U.S. as well. But to Canada, it could really be super damaging. I mean, don't get me wrong. It will be damaging, as I say, full stop, to America. But it could be even more damaging, full stop, to Canada. It's a horrible idea. I mean, everybody ends up, it blinds both parties type thing. But I worry that maybe his long game is to try to take part of Canada. I think it's so...
It's embarrassing.
Well, of course it's embarrassing, and
that's just on the surface. It's embarrassing.
Such lunacy that I can't imagine he'll follow through with it. But what it has done, and this is already done, Donald Trump, in this 6 weeks that he's been president, or whatever it's been, a little over 6 weeks, he has completely dismantled the relationships economically, militarily, that have protected the free world, flawed though they may be, generally protected the free world for decades now. I mean, the entire post-World War II relationships that have been carefully crafted based on treaty and based on rising and falling economies, there's a subtlety, there's a nuance to this. It's not easy to build these relationships. And the one thing that America has been good about is these treaties, honoring these treaties in general. And I'd suggest to you that now America's, depending on America to be a nation of its word, is something that's gone. It just is. I mean, look at what happened when Trump came in the first time. He pulls out of the Iran nuclear deal right away, just because it was Obama's deal. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords. The Iran nuclear deal took a long time to get together, and it was a net win for the U.S., in my judgment. And similarly, the Paris Climate Accords, I don't understand why you got out of those. Those are almost, they were unenforceable. They did nothing. It was more virtue signaling than anything else. And every nation in the world, virtually, I think except North Korea, was a signatory. North Korea and Russia, maybe. So I didn't get that. But this is who he is now. And I think what's happened is he's destroyed the faith in America to really be about things that are associated with liberty, democracy, the people's voice, justice, even understanding that America is a flawed system of justice. It still feels as though the due process and the freedom to speak, the First Amendment guarantees in this country, are those things that the rest of the world has looked up to. And I think that's gone. And he did it in, what, as I say, 6 weeks.
If you say that, well, America could be different in 4 years, well, we'll get this back. We'll get it back on track. The problem is when you talk about whether the world can trust America anymore, that the voters did this. And so it really makes America look volatile because now there's no guarantee that the voters will get it wrong next time too.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I think the voters are easily duped. And I also think that the voters sort of have singular things they respond to. This trans thing, we've talked about it over and over. I mean, you'd think that this trans issue must come up every day at every meal, you know, in every venue of life in America, the way they play it so heavily. These social wedge issues, they will bring them up again. And the Russian, and straight up it's the Russian fueling of social media propaganda is indisputable, and it's effective as hell. It's incredibly effective. And now you don't even have any aggressive cyber tactic being pursued on our side. Remember, Pete Hegseth and the crew at the Department of Defense are being told to undo all the cyber military, I say cyber military is the wrong word, cyber operations that are associated with taking on Russia. In other words, we have a cyber division that leans on them. They have a cyber division that leans on us. So the one that we have that is leaning on them from a cyber standpoint, it's been dismantled now. It's been stopped. Full stop. That order just came in, I want to say 10 days ago. So, anyway, I'm and the last thing I would say, Kim, is related to whether or not there'll be a fair election. I just don't know. I mean, a lot is being talked about. Well, in the midterms and this, I just don't know that you'll have a fair election. I have questions about the last election. You know, I really do. Between voter suppression and tabulation manipulation, I think that there's significant questions there. They're studying vote tampering. I don't think voters chose this after all. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Stella Luna. So, all right. Now I really do have to wrap up, Albert. I'd like to hang, but I can't. Want to, but I can't. Dying to, but I can't. Ryan says with 20 euros super chat. Thank you, Ryan. Trade wars historically are games of, quote, who can take the pain longer. The larger economy usually wins those. Unfortunately for Canada, the U.S. economy is 13 times larger and 15 times larger than Mexico. You know, that's what I was saying before. Thank you for the specifics, though. That America is in a position to take whatever trade war is going down. They could seriously damage Canada. Again, that still could be a long way from annexing any part of Canada, but look, that might be their long game, and maybe not that long a game. Wes Theory, thank you for the $5 super sticker. Wes, you are an OG, and I appreciate your support of the show. Thanks to you as well, Rob. Right on. Big shout out to both of you.
Big shout out.
Yeah. Stephen Cox with a super sticker for $5. Come on, Stephen. Thank you.
Big shout out.
I love it. Richard Delamater says the 4th of July ought to be pretty damn interesting. Yay, USA. Well, the one thing the USA loves is fireworks. Any chance to fire, you know. Louis says, F eggs. Dom, McAllen, and Cristal are going to cost a fortune, and they're already not cheap. This is a bridge too far. Hashtag terrifically bad idea. LOL. Yeah, well done, Luis, everybody. Yeah, when eggs approach the price of a bottle of Dom. I already did that New York Magazine thing. It's just interesting, not just the tariffs, though. Yeah, right on. Well, I love it. I could stay all day. But Kim has places to go. Honestly, she is the one who is.
I blame you.
All right, you can blame me, but I mean, I can go. I got time. I got things I care about. I got other stories. But Kim has got her after party live, and she likes to do the after party live. She likes to meet with you. It's not a heavy show. It's kind of a fun show, so you may want to try it.
We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
They do it live. That's what they call it, the after party live. That's over on the After Party Live channel. As for us, tomorrow, Friday Fabulous Florida, Albert runs through some of the likely participants in Mark's Madness, which begins after the show on Monday. If you don't know how Mark's Madness works, don't worry. We'll explain it to you. It is madness, and it is Mark. So,
I'm Shadow Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. All the ways you support the show.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
We are out of time. Sorry about that. Bye-bye.